Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of the Eleusinian Society. If you haven't checked out my previous two videos on Freemasonry of Ancient Egypt, make sure to go check those out before you watch this because this is the third part. I guess I thought it was only going to be 3 parts, but we're going to go into a 4th. So this is the 3rd installment. We'll be going over the 2nd degree all the way until the 4th degree, because that's when things start getting a little bit more intense. But without further ado, here is our 3rd installment of Freemasonry of Ancient Egypt and the Crata Repoa as told by Manly P. Hall. The 2nd degree is called the Neochorus. Once the Pastophorus had spent a year as an apprentice of the lodge, he was examined by his peers as to his knowledge and understanding of the works. To prepare him for his next step in his journey, the brother was put in a strange chamber called an endymion, or grotto of the initiates. The brother was served a large meal and given young women, either fellow priests' wives or teenage virgins.
What the hell is even that?
Which were intentionally placed near the Pastophorus to test his strength, to subdue his passions, and keep steadfast his thoughts. Now, I'll admit this is kind of a weird way of going about it, just putting a man in a room with a bunch of young girls. But, hey.
Somebody kill me, please!
I guess to prove whether or not he's capable of subduing his passions? I don't know. Giving into temptation, especially with the spouse of a fellow brother, was an event worthy of being rid from the group and being potentially killed, as it violated the oath taken with the menes at the altar, where the sword was grazed against the throat to instill the penalty of violations against it. Once passed, he is questioned once more by the Thesmophores, who brought him into his initiation previously. If the questions were answered correctly, the initiate was sprinkled by the stolista, or simply the sprinkler of water, to purify him before meeting the assembly. There he was confirmed to have resisted temptation with chastity and attained wisdom in the ways of the craft in front of his peers. After being confirmed, the Thesmophores leaps forward towards the initiate and throws a live serpent at them. In later accounts, the serpent was said to have been replaced by a gilt replica, but I guess in the original and earlier forms, they used live snakes. The chamber is then filled with several snakes, representations of things we can't control, wherein the initiate was completely helpless and vulnerable. There is also belief that the serpents used in this trial were skillfully deprived of venom, using a secret method which only the Copts in Egypt had crafted. If the candidate showed little to no fear, he was lauded and appraised. If he showed fear and weakness, he was pitied and possibly held back from his initiation. With a satisfactory performance, the candidate was brought into a room where there were 2 columns, and in between was the image of a griffin pushing a 4-spoked wheel. Now, if you've done any research into the history of Native American spiritualism and symbolism, you know that one of the most important symbols out there is the medicine wheel. It is also a 4-spoked wheel, which is really interesting because of what I'm about to say next. The columns were situated east and west. The griffin symbolizes the sun, and the 4 spokes of the wheel, the 4 seasons, which is the same in Native American lore, which might prove that the symbolism is a very old symbol that maybe crossed oceans. Who knows? The 4 spokes also represent the 4 aspects of being: spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental. It was there when the 2nd round of knowledge was shared. The 1st degree lectures were based on hieroglyphics, medicine, and the understanding of life and death. The 2nd were based on the scientific, the use of a hygrometer to measure the waters of the Nile. He was taught geometry and architecture, the mathematical art which has composed everything in the known world from time immemorial. The nature of these studies is more far advanced than we know today, and it was more spiritual and metaphysical than face value. Because of this, the privilege of attaining this wisdom was reserved only for the esoteric initiate, worthy of its power. The symbol of this degree is that of the caduceus of Mercury, or a staff with a snake wrapped around it. The sacred word was allegedly Eve, to remind brethren of the fall of man from Eden. When saluting the fellow Neochorus, the fellow brothers would salute each other, crossing their arms over their breast. After the ceremony was completed, it was the initiate's duty to regularly clean the sacred columns. Neochorus is actually a word that comes from the name given in ancient Greece to somebody who curates a temple, takes care of its grounds and such. So it's a pretty fitting title if you think about it for somebody that would clean the pillars. And next up we have the third degree, the
Gate of Death.
The initiate who passed the third degree was known as the Melanophores, which translates as those who wear black. Once the Neocorus was visibly prepared and fluent in the ways of the craft, he was brought into a small room near the entrance of the temple, where above the door read the words, "The Gate of Death." This room was no longer filled with the living, but instead housed the corpses of past brethren, prepared and wrapped in mummy form, along with coffins and other symbols of death. It was here where the initiate, now called a neophyte, would witness the paraskistos, or embalmer, hard at work, preparing the recently deceased for the afterlife. Other priests with different jobs were also there, partaking in specialized tasks, all under the motif of mummification rites. In the middle of the room was a coffin bearing the cartouche of Osiris, with splatters of blood inside the bed, indicating a recent death happened there. The officials in the room immediately stopped their work and gathered around the neophyte. They questioned him, saying things like, "Did you kill the master? Did you kill our master?" After replying no, a pair of tapikites, or people who brought the dead into their tombs, grabbed the initiate and brought him to a hall where the other brethren were found wearing black robes, hence the name Melanophores. The king would then offer his crown to the aspirant, but knowing the nature of all these tests and rituals, he denied it, threw it to the ground, and stomped it with his foot. The king becomes furious at the act and grabs a ceremonial axe. He shouts at him, "Outrage, vengeance," and then hits the initiate across the head. Well, he doesn't literally hit him over the head. He just kind of gently taps it to... He just kind of gently taps it to enact hitting him in the head.
Nice.
The aspirant is then mock mummified, wrapped in bandages, and mourned by his peers. He was paraded through the halls until they reached a place known as the Sanctuary of Spirits, where participants would make noises of thunder and rain. Fires flickered to give the illusion to the candidate of lightning, although he couldn't really see anything because the bandages were covering his eyes. A priest playing the part of Charon, the boatman of the river Styx, took possession of the candidate and brought them into a dark place, where Pluto, or Hades, sat at his throne, and at his side were his two atronachs, Rhadamanthus and Minos. There was also others present in the room, such as Alastor, Nyctius, and Orpheus. This is where the candidate was finally accepted as a full brother of the craft. He was unwrapped of the linen and received 3 key pieces of instruction by the Hierophant. Never thirst for blood, and help those members of society whose life may be endangered. Never leave a dead body unburied. And await resurrection of the dead and future judgment. The new Melanophores studied drawing and painting, which was done so because of his new task in the group, which would be to paint and decorate the coffins for the mummies. He was taught a new alphabet named the hierogrammatical alphabet, which was a lettering system based on geometry and the elements of history and astronomy. He was taught the art of funeral orations so he could fulfill his obligation to bury all of the dead. The sacred words of this degree were given, words that I don't want to say on my channel out of respect for the rituals of these people. You can look them up if you'd like, or read this book. I highly recommend you read this book if you're spending your time watching this video. He was also given the phrase, "I count the days of anger." The newly made Melanophores remained inside an underground chamber until he could prove his capability. This was done to see if he would remain at the 3rd degree, or perhaps be moved to the 4 higher degrees, which were even more exclusive than the previous ones. The 4th degree, the Christophores. When the candidate was told the secret words and the phrase, "I count the days of anger," it's related to the Christophores 4th degree. You see, they spent 18 months in what they call the anger period.
I'm on my period!
And after the 18 months, the Thesmophores, or conductor, came to visit the candidate. After arming him with a dull sword and a small shield, the initiate was to follow him through the galleries of the temple. And out of seemingly nowhere, a group of men appeared with hideous masks and torches with snakes wrapped around them. They attacked the initiate, shouting, "Panis!" Which is kind of weird because in Latin and Greek, like, that means bread. So they're literally like, they're attacking him, being like, "Bread! Bread! Bread!"
I'm sorry I got carried away and I said things I shouldn't have said, and I deeply apologize.
The initiate was to battle the foes, but due to their overwhelming numbers, they easily took him down and blindfolded him. They also placed a rope around his neck as a restraint to guide him into a hall where he received a new degree. They took his blindfold off, and to the candidate's surprise, the hall was decorated in dazzling decor. Statues, reliefs, maxims, carvings, gold gilt and full of the most detailed paintings. Around the room were seated the king himself, along with some of the society's officers, the demiurgos, or the chief inspector, the stolista, or the water sprinkler who had purified him previously, the secretary and treasurer. All wore the Aletheia, or goddess of truth. The words were spoken, "Eum omnium hominum justissimum et tenacissimum apportebat qui circa colum imaginem ex saphiro gemma confectam gestibat," which translates to, "He was the most just and tenacious of all men, and around his neck he wore the image made of a sapphire gem." The initiate is praised for his hard work and is told that he is only halfway through his studies so far. He is told to drink a bitter liquid called a kaichion, which, according to Homer in the Iliad, was made of Pramnian wine, barley, and shredded goat cheese.
I'm about to milk a goat and make some goat cheese.
He was vested with ornaments and given a shield bearing the image of Isis, or Minerva, or Athena. They're all the same. He was also given the boots of Anubis, or Mercury in the Roman mythology, and the mantle of Orcai, named for Orcus, or the god of the underworld, who is a punisher of oath breakers, in the form of a hood which was worn over the head. Pretty fitting for somebody whose entire society is based on oaths. Wearing the newly attained attire, he was told of a quest where he would have to go deep inside of a cavern, find an individual, chop off their head, and return their head to the king. "Behold the enemy's cavern!" exclaimed the parties involved. Upon entering the cave, the initiate came across the image of a beautiful woman, which wasn't a real woman, but was made of either bladder or skin. They tried to make it as close as they could to looking like a real woman.
Yeah, what is it?
We're breaking up. I found a real woman.
The Kistophores grabbed their hair, struck their neck, and decapitated them, and brought their head back to the king, where he was informed that the woman, or the image of the woman that he had just killed, was actually a gorgai, or a gorgon, which, if you know Greek mythology, you know that Medusa was a gorgon. He was then told that the gorgai was a symbol for the wife of Typhon, or Seth, who is the brother of Osiris and ultimately the one who has Osiris killed. The candidate was the embodiment of the Avenger of Evil. He changed clothing, and his name was inscribed in the Book of Judges of the land. He was given privilege to talk personally with the king and partake in the court feast in his honor. He was given a special pin to wear at this feast, which bore the image of Athena, or Minerva, or Isis, in the form of an owl, and the allegory was explained to him. Who would use an owl as their logo? Man at birth is blind as an owl, and becomes man only by the aid of experience and the light of philosophy. The hood represented wisdom, and the severed head represented the repression of passions. The shield, a defense against those who slander in your name. The column, firmness. The water, a thirst for science. The quiver, beauty. The olive branch, a symbol of peace. The candidate was then taught that the true name of the great legislator is Joah, a shortened version of Jehovah or Yahweh. This name is also the name of the order. He was now allowed to attend the regular meetings and use this password to get inside. The newly made Christophorus was taught the Ammonitish language, a very old and rare and mysterious language, along with human sciences. This is where the candidate would transcend into the grand manifestation of light, or the greatest of the greater mysteries of ancient Egypt. I'd like to thank you for joining us again on the Eleusinian Society. Make sure to subscribe so you're notified when we post our next video on ancient Egyptian Freemasonry. And make sure to comment down below if you have any suggestions for future videos.